All right, we are back. I hope you guys are still with us. I have a question for you. Have you ever wondered how prunes are harvested? Or actually, let's back up. Have you ever wondered the difference between prunes and dried plums? That is a question I often have, and I went to a great source. We visited with Stephen Filter of Filter Farms in Live Oak, California earlier this month, and he'll tell you where Live Oak, California is in his video. He is a farmer and they grow a lot of different things. And right now it's springtime. So their busy season is really the summer, especially with the different commodities that they grow. But we wanted to know what's happening in the spring at Filter Farms. So we went and visited Stephen Filter of Filter Farms, and you're going to see a virtual field trip that we shot, and you're going to hear from Stephen. But then after, Stephen will be live with us, and we would love to get your questions. So watch the video, get your questions ready, and then you get to have a live chat with Stephen. So we will start playing that video right now.
Welcome everybody. Today we're out here at my family's farm. My name is Stephen Filter. I'm a 4th generation farmer here in Live Oak, California. We're located about an hour north of Sacramento, just right off Highway 99, and we farm peaches, prunes, and walnuts. We also have a large custom harvesting operation during walnuts where we harvest other customers' crops, bring them in, hull them, dry them, and ship them to the processor. When I say I'm a 4th generation farmer, I mean that we've been farming this property for over 120 years now. My great-grandfather immigrated from Germany and settled here, growing various crops, which turned into peaches, prunes, and walnuts that we grow today. A fun fact, actually, about my family is our last name actually started with the letter V. And when he emigrated through Ellis Island, in his thick German accent, it sounded like filter. And that's how we became the Filters. So today, we farm about 1,000 acres here. We're in Sutter County, right next to the Feather River, on some of the best soil in California. We're very lucky to have good water here. Even with a drought, we use conservation techniques, but we're still able to farm to our full acreage potential. Today, we're gonna be doing a little bit of everything. We're gonna walk from the walnuts that we're in here right now. We're gonna talk about what's going on in the orchards today. We're gonna go visit one of the peach orchards where we're actually thinning the fruit, which is our next step before we get to harvest, which is just a couple of months away. After that, we'll go to one of our prune orchards and actually see those being thinned by machine versus the peaches being thinned by hand. Then we'll take a quick jaunt up the road and visit our local Sunsweet dryer, where all of our prunes are delivered during harvest. And that's where they become an actual prune from a plum, and we'll talk more about that a little later. Other than that, we'll also visit the Feather River and see how the drought is currently impacting our farm. Okay, so let's talk about where we're at right now. So we are in a walnut orchard. This is about a 25-year-old orchard. So it was planted when I was really young. It's Chandler's, which is the most popular variety of walnuts grown here in California. This orchard is also very close to our home operations. So our processing plant is right here next door. And these walnuts will only go about 100 yards before they're shipped to a store near you. So what's going on in the orchard today? Right now, we are just keeping everything growing until harvest. We're kind of in that maintenance mode, giving the trees exactly what they need. The walnut trees are a lot like us, and same with the peaches and prunes. They need water, they need to stay hydrated, they need food, so we give them different amendments, different fertilizers to keep them growing healthy, and they also need to just have the right environment to grow in. Unfortunately, as farmers, we don't really have that opportunity to control the wind or the rain. But luckily, so far this year, we've lucked out. Haven't had any big problems with Mother Nature, and she's actually been on our side a little bit. So let's talk about exactly what's going on with the walnuts right now. So let me grab one off the tree here. And I can actually show you what a walnut looks like today. So while that doesn't look like what you would see in the grocery store, the walnut is actually growing inside this green hole. And if I cut one open, put it in the shade. you can actually see the little walnut meats growing in there. So those will continue to grow until about mid-September, where we'll come through and harvest. At that time, this green outer shell, called the hull, will actually dry up and fall off, and we'll know it's time to pick. So besides that, let's talk about a couple things that are special to this orchard. Like I said, it's about 25 years old and was planted when I was very young. So one of the unique things about this orchard, and also like a lot of other walnut orchards, is the trees are actually grafted. So you can see here on the tree that as you get down toward the soil, the bottom part is actually a different material, different texture of bark. So it's a little bit rougher and a little darker color. Because when the tree was actually grown in the nursery, the top part of the rootstock, the rough part down at the bottom, was cut off and the Chandler variety was grafted onto the top. And so that gave us the exact variety we want and gave us the characteristics of the crop that we want, but also provided us with the roots that we desired for this type of soil. So these roots are disease resistant, but also work very good in our loamy soil and take up water very well. Okay, so like I mentioned, throughout the year, we have to make sure the trees have plenty of water. So while there's other different ways to irrigate your orchard, some orchards are still flood irrigated where the water is just spread across on the top, kind of like you're flooding a new lake or a new pond. Here, we irrigate solely by microjet sprinklers. And so you can see this orchard is being irrigated right now. We run the water anywhere from 24 to 36 hours, depending on how deep the water goes. So now with new technologies, we actually monitor all of this on our phones or our computers in the office and can actually tell using electronic moisture probes where that water is reaching in the soil profile. But we used to always just do it manually using a soil probe like you see here. And so how we would do that is every day, about every 12 hours of irrigation running, we'd come out and walk to multiple spots out in the orchard. We would simply take this, push it down into the ground. That's about the length of a foot. We would pull it out and see what the soil actually looked like. Here you can see this one's been running since probably about 24 hours ago. And so it's plenty wet in that first top foot. So we would go down to about 36 inches and see where our water was at. 36 inches is about the general depth that a walnut root would get. So we're making sure that we're using enough water to fully supply the tree, but we're not filling any of the ground beneath the root structure. That way we're conserving as much water as we can. We also, throughout the year, will use these soil probes to take soil samples. And so we'll go out to the orchards and go, like I said, to various locations and take samples of the soil and actually send them to an analytical lab. That lab tells us the exact nutrient content that is available in the soil for the trees at that time. That lets us tailor our fertilizer and our other soil amendments to be perfect for what that orchard needs. So while we're talking about irrigating our walnuts, I wanted to point out a structure here on the farm. You'll see a lot of these right off the side of the roads around different orchards. So this is actually where we're getting the water for that orchard. This is a deep water well. This here is actually our electric pump that's pulling it out of the ground, and various filters, which helps us provide the clean water to the sprinklers. And also, we're able to monitor exactly how much groundwater we're pulling up and putting on our trees. That helps us over time monitor to make sure there's no trends in the amount of water we're putting out, and also make sure that our well and aquifer is still healthy. Okay, so now we're out here at one of my family's peach orchards. So this is actually our earliest variety. This peach orchard will be ready for harvest about the second week of July. So about 70 days from now, we'll actually be picking this orchard. So today we're going through one of the important processes of growing peaches, and that's actually thinning the fruit. So as you can see in the background here, Juan is going through the tree by hand and pulling off a lot of fruit so that we make sure we have the exact amount that we need on the tree. So for this orchard, we're shooting for about 800 to 850 peaches per tree. So while it looks like we're wasting a lot of fruit, there's many reasons why we thin. So one of the reasons we thin is the tree has a set amount of energy every year. It can only put so much energy into fruit production. So instead of doing over 2,000 maybe say peaches that are very small and not as good peaches that want to go to market, we thin the tree down so that we produce nice sized fruit with all of that energy. While it looks like those peaches on the ground are being wasted, the carbon, the nitrogen, the other micronutrients that make up those fruit are actually just being recycled back into the soil. So as we irrigate, mow, and take care of the orchard, those nutrients will be sucked back down into the roots and probably end up into one of these peaches. As you can see, when you thin, you will go through each tree and break up the bunches to get the right spacing you want on the limb. That allows the peaches to grow very big and also doesn't stress the tree out by putting too much weight on a single branch. That allows this orchard to continue producing for nearly 20 years. Over here you can see a tree that hasn't been thinned yet, and you can see how much fruit is on there. They're almost clustered together like grapes. So you can imagine if you had that many peaches the size of my fist on that one little branch, you definitely have a lot of problems. We go through each branch by hand and we'll pull off the fruit. You can see where different peaches were pulled off here to give you about a fist spacing between each peach. As we work through, we like to visualize each peach being about the size of your fist at harvest. So you can see here that these peaches would have plenty of space to grow to full size. So you can see this limb hasn't been thinned yet. There's clusters of peaches all throughout it. So we'll actually go through by hand and pull off a majority of these clusters to leave the peaches far enough apart so that they have enough space to grow to full size by harvest. So now we're out here in one of my family's prune orchards. So as you can tell, this is a little bit different looking from the walnut orchards and the peach orchard that we just visited. So out here, we haven't invested in sprinklers yet, so this is still a flood irrigated orchard. So the ground is worked up between each irrigation. That's why you can see the dirt clods and the soil is grass free right now. We just irrigated these about 2 weeks ago. You can also tell there's a lot of open space out here. So this is a pretty old orchard, you know, granted besides the replants here and there. So this orchard was planted further apart. So this is actually nearly 21-foot spacing, which our newest orchard we found is better to keep the trees a little bit shorter. So we actually planted those at about 18 by 16 feet. So per acre, about 50 trees more. That actually helps us not have to grow the trees as big, but produces a higher yield overall per acre. So today we're actually out here machine thinning these peaches, or these prunes. Instead of doing them by hand, we simply use our walnut harvesting equipment, our walnut shaker, to grab each tree and shake off an approximate number of fruit. Okay, so like I said, we're out here thinning prunes today. It's the same concept as what we saw thinning peaches. So we're trying to make sure that the tree has just enough fruit for all of its energy to make nice big prunes that go to market. So instead of by hand, we're out here today thinning with shakers. And so these are actually our walnut shakers that we use during harvest with a few little differences. And so the actual shaking head, the part that grabs the tree, has centrifugal weights in it. So those weights are really heavy for a walnut tree. They shake really hard to bring all the nuts down during harvest. For prunes, we take most of those weights out except for a little tiny one. So it shakes a lot softer so that it actually won't shake all of the fruit off of these prune trees. So the guys go through each orchard and use their opinion to decide how long to shake each tree, usually just a few seconds. So now we're here at the next step for our prunes. This is where they go directly after harvest. The prunes you saw getting thinned earlier will be harvested about the middle to late August and will come just 5 miles up the road to this Sunsweet dryer. So one of the things I always get asked is what's the difference between a prune and a plum? And really, it's just the time of their life cycle. So right now, technically, these that we saw in the field are plums. So all a prune is a dried plum, which they come here to actually become a prune. So once they go through that drying process, they end up looking like this, a healthy, full of nutrients, delicious snack. And so all of our plums that we grow on the farm are designed to be prunes. So as we refer to them throughout the year, we just simply call them prunes. So once we harvest in August, the prunes come here where they are sorted and then they actually are placed onto these wooden trays you can see here. So to dry this much fruit, it's very similar to a dehydrator that you would have at home. The fruit is layered onto different racks, as you can see here, into single layers, and stacked up to go through drying tunnels. Once they're stacked on these multiple trays, they're shifted through a set of rails here in the ground over to one of the multiple drying tunnels here. As you can see, there's probably about 40 tunnels here at this dryer. Sunsweet opens and operates a handful of dryers every harvest where all the prunes in this area are dried. Once they're dried, they go just down the road to Yuba City where they are packaged and shipped to a store near you. So for the last stop of today's field trip, I wanted to bring you guys down to the Feather River. My family's lucky enough to farm in multiple river bottoms along this beautiful river. Unfortunately, I can give you a visual representation of Mother Nature's fury today. We're looking at direct results of the current drought situation we're in. Unfortunately, there's not as much snow falling in the mountains, which results in less water in our reservoirs and less water in our river systems. Where I'm standing here today on a normal year would be about water up to my waist. As you can see, we're far from that. Unfortunately, we have to deal with what Mother Nature gives us. Over the last couple decades, we've transitioned from pulling water for irrigation out of the river to more sustainable groundwater practices for our ranch. Unfortunately, not every grower is able to do that. So really, I want to thank everyone for coming on this field trip today. It's been my pleasure to show you guys around, show you the multiple crops we grow, and teach everyone a little bit what it is about how it is to live your life as a farmer. So I'll be live now for any questions you guys may have.
All right. Let's see. Oh, hi, Stephen. There you are. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Hi, Stephen.
Can you hear me?
Hi. Thank you so much for that. Giving us a tour of your orchards. We really appreciate it. And
Of course.
we are going to take some questions now. I'm going to start actually with that visual of you at the Feather River. Obviously, you were used to being waist high in water and it was dry. So on the note of weather, how do you cope with weather that is constantly changing? I know this year you guys had frost, but then you also had some high temperatures. So, I mean, what is a grower and a farmer to do?
Really, it's just kind of roll with the punches. It's the weather's out of our hands, unfortunately. If we could control how much rain we get and the temperatures, I mean, every year would just be as easy as can be. So far this year, we had frost right during bloom. Luckily, our trees were just far enough along that we didn't have too much damage. Some of the damage we did see were in those peaches, which luckily we thinned, so we can kind of work around those frost damaged fruit and still have a good crop. For the water, for the variance in temperatures, it's a lot of planning ahead, a lot of looking at the 10-day forecast and saying, okay, it's going to be really hot this week, so let's move some of the irrigations up. Let's plan on getting some of the fertilizers on before it gets too hot. It's really just kind of roll with the punches. There's a lot of cultural practices you can do in the orchards for frost. We can actually run those microjet sprinklers overnight, and it just the heat of the water coming out of the ground will actually warm that orchard just a couple of degrees to help the fruit set.
Interesting. That is really interesting. I saw a question pop up from Jamie Beck, and this is a great one, just on the same lines of other climate environment. Was your ranch impacted by the fires of the last 2 years?
Yes, mainly in the way of having to work out in the smoke. Luckily, we are down in the valley, so we don't have any fires that, burn right up to our front door. But just working in the smoke, having to deal with having 20, 30 employees in the field breathing air that you shouldn't be breathing. That's one of the good things about having to go through wildfires and the pandemic and everything is we were prepared. We had the PPE, we had masks, and we've kind of become accustomed to it, unfortunately. And that hurts to say that, but that's kind of the reality of growing in California. As far as the fruit, it didn't affect the quality. There is some speculation that because of the overcast caused by the smoke, that the harvest was pushed back a little bit, and it took a little longer, but it was, the matter of a couple days.
So many different things that affect the food we eat that we have no idea. I saw another question pop in, and it asked about how many family members are involved in your family farm, and how does, I think they're also asking about like succession planning. Are you hoping that the tradition continues through the years? Talk about what generation, I know you mentioned it in the video, but what generation farmer you are, how many family members work on the farm, and what the future looks like for you.
Yeah, so I'm the only 4th generation member of the family back on the farm. I currently farm with my dad and his 3 younger brothers. And we're kind of the 5 that manage everything, make the decisions, get everybody going in the mornings, and, manage when we're harvesting, when we're, going to be irrigating, kind of all that, the big picture stuff. So there are some other family members that are still involved in the ag industry and are just, kind of with their own families in different parts of California. So I think in the future, depending on when 3rd generation decides to fully retire and step back, if they do, my dad says he's going to do it until, he's gone. I'll probably be the only 4th generation.
Wow. That's a lot to think about, I imagine. We have some other questions coming in to the different commodities you grow. One person asked, how many plums are generally on a tree?
Yeah, so before thinning, we've counted trees that have up to 15,000 prunes on them. After thinning, it really kind of depends what the market's looking for. Obviously, you could grow a lot, thousands, probably 6,000-7,000 decent sized prunes, but they're not going to be as big as the market kind of dictates they want. So we shoot for between 3,000 and 4,000 when we're thinning. And that's on a good size, healthy tree. Some of the trees, on that field trip that we saw in that orchard are a little bit older, a little bit smaller, and then we'll shoot for a little less.
Wow, that's a lot of fruit. And I'm going to double up some questions. Number 1, how do you pollinate your trees? And number 2, asking about sterilizing and cleaning plums in the process of drying them. So first, how is pollination done in general? And then where does sterilizing and cleaning come in the process of drying the plums?
Yeah, so for pollination, the prunes are the only ones we grow that actually need bees. And so we put about 2 hives per acre. So if we had a 10-acre field, we'd have 20 hives out there. And they're out there through the entire, from the beginning of bloom, basically till petal fall. We work really closely with our bee guys so that if there are any insecticide applications done in neighboring fields or just, in our general area or on crops next to us that aren't necessarily prunes, to make sure that their bees are safe. The county does a lot of work with that too during bloom. The peaches and walnuts are just wind pollinated. They used to believe that peaches needed those hives to actually set a good crop load, but over time, in research and studying peaches and the new varieties, they've learned that you can get just as much crop load without them. And during peach bloom, most of those hives are in an almond orchard. And so that becomes a very busy time of year. So it's not worth the cost to put them out there. You don't really get any yield bump. And the walnuts are the same way. They used to actually have varieties that every 10th tree or so, you would plant a different variety of walnut out in that orchard so that it would help pollinate the rest. Now we kind of learned, and as the varieties and the root stocks have gotten better, you can just stay with simply one variety.
Great. And then that other question about the cleansing.
Yeah, so really it all starts from just the ground up. So we have, very good food safety practices as far as, where bathrooms are placed during the year. And this is all out in the field. Bathrooms, where lunch breaks are taken, making sure there's no trash, there's no, we unfortunately have to deal with dumping a lot from, people just, trying to get rid of stuff in our orchards. So making sure there's no, for example, like, dead animal parts or something that you would find out in nature. Making sure all that's out of the field, your fruit's clean, making sure the machines are cleaned every day after picking all day. That sugar from the prunes will actually build up on some of the sizing chains and belts. So every afternoon, those are cleaned to make sure that none of that, gets kind of rancid overnight. Once they go to that SunSweet dryer, that's where they are actually washed. The sorting machine, it's actually called the dipper. So it actually dips them through water, rinses them really good, and then they're stacked on the trays before going in the drying tunnel.
Excellent. Thank you. I know we have a lot of questions. People are really interested, which is fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great.
A few more, two that kind of go together. What would happen if the plums, or soon to be prunes, were just left on the tree to dry? Can they just dry by themselves on the tree? I imagine it would be a much slower process. And then also, do you ever harvest green plums versus letting them ripen on the tree?
So I'll start kind of with your second one. We've never harvested them green. Even when we start harvest, so all 500 acres of prunes that we grow are all the same variety. They're all French prunes. So they all basically ripen at the same time. So we test all those orchards, looking at sugar content and basically the pressure in that prune, how much pressure it takes to break the skin. And so when we first start harvest, those prunes actually have like a tint of green to them. So if you see a video, I know that we did one with the Sac Valley water, and a couple of people on that one had asked, well, why are you harvesting them so green? Because they did have a little bit of green tint on one side of the fruit. But if you were to taste that, it's ripe. It's full of sugar and ready to go.
Great. And then that other question, what would happen if you just let the fruit dry on the tree naturally? What would that process look like? I imagine it'd be a much longer and less productive.
Yeah, definitely. So in the dryer, those prunes are dried for right around 20 to 21 hours at about 190 degrees. So we would obviously never reach that temperature out in the field. And then in late August going into September, those fruit will dry on the tree, but having those heavy dews at night just invites mold and basically decay, like any fresh fruit would. Mold kind of in your refrigerator if it gets left too long. You definitely run into those issues and probably see a lot of food safety issues pop up around that. Prunes used to be simply harvested from the field and laid out on tarps on the ground and dried just by the sunlight. Took a lot longer, and it was, take a lot of labor to do.
Absolutely. How long, here's another question, and this may be for somebody that just planted a tree. How long does it take for a tree that is planted to produce fruit, either for a farmer like yourself or for somebody like me that plants it in my backyard? Are they one and the same? And how long is it going to be before I get some fruit?
Yeah, so definitely a fruit tree, peaches, prunes, nectarines, apples, kind of all of those. It's really just a couple of years. You're not going to get much. You'll only get, maybe 1 or 2 pieces of fruit in the second year. It really kind of depends on the health and how vigorous that tree is. But also you kind of have to weigh out the fact of, do you want to try to get all that fruit, the say 20 pieces of fruit your third year, or do you want the tree to get bigger so in subsequent years you have more? So on a lot of, say, our peaches for the second and third year, right about this time as we're going through, if we're doing any pruning, we'll actually pull those fruit off and just let them recycle back into the soil just to promote the growth from that tree. There's kind of the thought that, you can either make some more money your third and fourth year, or you can wait and then your 5th through 12th year, you'll make all that money back plus more. So.
Excellent. So we saw you doing the thinning process, and I think that's intriguing. I think a lot of people don't realize that you thin the fruit. How long does it take? Do you only thin it once, or are you continually thinning throughout growing season? And how long, let's say we saw the thinning process, is that an all-day process? Is it an hour? Obviously, when you thin the plums, prunes, that was a machine, so that's quick. But if you're going by hand, how long does that take? And is the thinning process done more than once?
Yeah, so we usually try to go through just once in an orchard, but it kind of comes back to your question about weather and Mother Nature. Peaches, for example, when it gets above like 98 degrees for a good spell, say a week above 100 degrees, those fruit will tend to just ripen instead of size. And so we'll sometimes we'll go back into a field that we maybe left on the side of heavy, maybe a little too much fruit per tree, but if it was a good year, they would all size, and we'll actually go back through there and pull them off. Usually that's using just like a pole with a metal ring on it, just to kind of pull them down. And it's obviously not nearly as many as we pull off this time of year. If everything goes right, we go through just one time and, do the best we can. Depending on the orchard and how big the trees are, they can do, our crew can do around, I'd say, probably about 20 trees a day is an average. And so that's in about an 8-hour workday. For me, I'd probably be a lot slower. But it really takes a lot of skill, because you're looking at the tree. You got to kind of visualize the whole thing at once. You can't just work inside of a little box, because you got to realize if one part of the tree is a little healthier, you can leave a little more fruit. If one branch is a lot weaker, you take a few more off and kind of try to put that whole tree together as one big piece.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We are going to move on to irrigation, and I think this is a great question. So how often do you irrigate? And I know that depends on the weather, and there's a lot that goes into that question, but also I think this is really interesting. How do you prevent root rot when you're irrigating?
Yeah, so depending on the crop, so walnuts can go, and depends on kind of where they are too. Walnuts can go 3 to 4 weeks without getting subsequent irrigations. Prunes are a little less, 2 to 3 weeks, and peaches we really stay on kind of like a 2-week schedule. And that's because, like I said in that video, we'll be harvesting those fruit in about a month and a half from now. So those fruit are taking up so much water, and those trees are taking up so much water. Those trees just dry the ground out so much quicker. Some of the walnuts we grow down in the river bottoms, even with the river that low, they have roots that go down 20 feet. And so they can actually suck out of the river. On some of this ground that's further away from the river, where you don't have roots that go that far, that are only 2, 3, maybe 4 feet down in the ground, it dries out a lot quicker. And so we have to keep more water on them. Root rot really isn't a problem unless the water is warm and it sits on them for a long time. So with those microjet sprinklers, within a couple of days of shutting that water off, it's muddy, it sticks to your boots when they're running. After we shut it off, you can drive a tractor out there in 2 or 3 days and not leave a track. And that's just how quick that ground dries out and how quick those trees are taking up water. We did, when the spillway crisis at Lake Orville, in 2017, and had a lot of water in our river bottom orchards, and actually went through a lot of that root rot, because that water sat on there, for days, weeks at a time. And you could actually see, we lost probably in one of our prune orchards, probably upwards of 30-40% of our trees out there, just because the water sat there. They were trying to bloom at that time, and so they just didn't have any oxygen down there.
That is a case when root rot was something that you actually experienced during that really trying time. Yeah.
At a very large scale. Yeah.
Absolutely. And a question you talked about in the beginning of the video, and I think this is why somebody asked this: what rootstock do the walnuts graft to? Can you talk about grafting? Yeah.
So it used to be, the main one was actually black walnut, which you can actually let black walnuts grow and use the nuts from them. Popular one is black walnut ice cream, which my grandma used to make all the time. So most of the trees used to be grafted to black walnuts. They're very hardy. They do well with water. They are disease resistant. Crown gall is one of the big diseases that lives in the soil and can really hurt an orchard, kill trees that are 10, 15-year-old trees that are otherwise completely healthy. So black walnut's resistant against that. The only problem with black walnut rootstock is it actually grows the tree a little smaller. So once you start getting into that, 8-year to 20-year mark in a walnut orchard, you can actually see a pretty big difference in black walnut rootstock versus some of the new ones. And a lot of the new ones are actually clonal rootstocks. So they are, grown in a lab, basically in test jars, and then grafted over to the tree when the tree is, very small, almost the size of a drinking straw. And those ones grow a lot quicker. Some of them are resistant against, say, nematodes, which are basically a little insect worm in the soil that attacks the roots. And some of them, do well in different types of soils. So just kind of depends on what your farm is doing, what your plan is, what your, big picture is on what rootstock you go with.
Great. Few more questions, and thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it, Stephen.
No problem.
How and what type of pesticides do you use? I know that is an issue that obviously Mother Nature, you have to plan for different things, and farmers do use pesticides at certain points. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So in a perfect world, we wouldn't use any of them. And I think one of the big misconceptions about how farmers use pesticides and insecticides is that we just go out there and blindly use them. We just, if we see one bug, we spray the whole orchard, but right now, and especially kind of as a result of the pandemic and just the global economy, is pesticides are incredibly expensive. So that's just another reason, if we don't need to use them to save our crop, we won't use them. So our pest control plan, basically, we follow integrated pest management plans. So we have a professional and his assistant that scout all of our fields every week. And they monitor all kinds of insect populations. So codling moth or oriental fruit moth in the fruit. They're constantly looking those, trapping, and kind of estimating in the future of like, okay, and I think in 3 weeks we'll have a population that needs to be addressed, and it'll be about the right time in that moth's life cycle to apply the pesticide that'll work the best. I kind of mentioned, during pollination and when there's a lot of beehives in the area, there's certain cutoff dates where you're not allowed to use certain insecticides after a certain day to protect the bees. Everyone that purchases these chemicals has to go to continuing education classes, has to hold specific licenses. We have to get recommendations from people that hold other licenses to advise on the use of that. So there's a lot of hoops we jump through, and we only use them when we really need to. And a lot of the chemicals we use now are very specific for what pest we're going after, so that it doesn't hurt, say, your beneficial insects, your wildlife, or just, doesn't stay in the fruit nearly as long.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying and explaining that subject matter.
Yeah.
It's really, really helpful. Somebody asked, and I want to know this answer too. Paula asked, do you get fruit loss due to birds? I mean, are birds coming down and eating your fruit? And how, as a commercial farmer, how do you control that?
Yeah, some of the peaches that will actually get a lot of orange color, different varieties kind of ripen up different. Some of the ones will ripen on the outside and turn a really bright orange about a week before you harvest. And we can get hit pretty hard with birds out there. We have, most of the time what we do is simply just put up colorful reflective ribbons, on, say, every 5th tree. And that seems to keep it down to a level that we're okay with. You're going to experience a little bit. And really, a peach that has a little tiny bird peck in it is still a good peach. It's just a little nick, as if you dropped it on the counter and made a little nick on your cutting board. So we actually, those will be cut off at the cannery, the little bird pecks, and as long as it's not above a certain level or a certain amount of damage on an individual peach, we can still use those. There's also other methods. There's an item called a Zond gun, which is basically a propane sound maker. And so sometimes you'll hear that, boom, every 30 seconds, every 5 minutes, out in the orchard. And that's just simply to kind of scare the birds off every couple of minutes. Unfortunately, those kind of can disrupt the neighborhood if you're farming near a town. And also, you know, they can just be expensive with propane prices to run and everything.
And you are talking to teachers right now. To wrap this up, what is something that you would like teachers to relay about farmers? You have boots on the ground, you're in a farming family, you're hoping to continue with the tradition. Why is it important for teachers to bring agriculture into their classrooms?
Yeah, and first off, I really want to say thank you to all the teachers out here that are taking a time out of their Saturday to learn more about, you know, farming. Farming is something we're always going to have to do. It's not going to go away. We're always going to need to be able to eat, be able to have a safe and, you know, full food supply. So I really thank you for that. I really want to spread awareness about what we do. There's, with the internet and everything, you know, it's easy to see bad things or to read bad things about farming, to read things that are jaded in a way to make us look like we don't care. I would 100% eat any of the fruit we grow, would feed it to anyone I care about. Like we do the best we can. We try to be safe with everything. We're just, you know, we're people. We're just like anybody. You know, we're doing the best we can. We're trying to grow good food, and we really just need to further educate children, adults, everyone about agriculture, because when it comes to voting, when it comes to being open to helping farmers in your community, to understand why your food prices might vary, you know, and then just buying California food, buying, you know, food grown in the United States. It all starts with education. So I really think it's just important to bring awareness, and just anything somebody can learn about any of the crops we grow. I think it's good.
Wonderful. Well, we thank you for your time on a Saturday, Stephen.
Yeah, not a problem.
We appreciate it. And we will have this video up on our website, this video, but as well as the virtual field trip. So thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it.
Of course. And again, thank you, everyone. And I believe my email was on the agenda. So if there are any further questions you have, or any way I can share my experiences or my knowledge, please feel free to reach out.
Wonderful. Enjoy your Saturday. We appreciate you coming on.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
All right, Stephen. And as Stephen just mentioned, he is really thankful for the teachers that are joining us right now on their Saturday. And with that, I believe I'm introducing Christy, right? So with that, we have a teacher that is actually going to present for us. Thank you so much. I would like to introduce Christy Fuso. She's a 7th grade teacher at Joseph Kerr Middle School in Sacramento County. Christy works to bring science into her classroom and is going to share how she meets the California academic standards while engaging her students through labs and science experiments. And that sounds really cool. I'm really excited. So welcome, Christy.
So I'm going to check my sound. Am I echoey at all? Can you hear me?
Sound great.
Okay, awesome. Just making sure. Well, thank you guys for having me on a Saturday. I'm always happy to teach teachers. In fact, it's one of my favorite things to do, even as a teacher. Those teachers that are on here, you guys know that, well, everybody knows that the world's been crazy, and it's nice to have a little bit of normalcy back in our world. And so school's been interesting. And so we have taken a standpoint at Joseph Kerr Middle School. Yes, I teach agriculture, but as science department that I work with very closely, we just wanted to put some normalcy back in these kids. And so we do that by hands-on activities. And the kids have really liked it because as you probably see, if you have kids of your own that are school age, they're still spending a lot of time on Chromebooks. And we've really taken the approach of going back to like our roots of being able to use a science notebook. In fact, mine's behind me on the wall. And I take a notebook with the students, and we do a lot of hands-on activities with that. So today I'm going to share with you guys how we tie agriculture to not only ag standards, but to California and GSS science standards. This can go for middle school to high school. I believe also the 5th grade science standards too, because they're the ones that cover life science. So what I'm going to be talking about today is more of the genetic side of things. And specifically, we start our genetics unit with reproduction, because in order for students to understand Punnett squares and how things, traits can be passed on to them, they have to know how those traits are passed on. And so it always makes them a little bit nervous, because we talk about sexual and asexual reproduction, but we talk about that from an agriculture standpoint. So I'm going to share with you guys my slideshow. But I have a lot of materials that I'm going to share with you guys, so you guys have access to all of this at the end. But I also want to share with you guys, I kind of was premature in pulling this up, so give me a second here. I want to share with you the standards that it's actually coming from. So I'm on the NGSS website currently. Are you guys able to see this? I'm hoping so. If you could let me know in the chat. Yes, awesome. So you should be looking at the science website. So this is the NGSS. And what I'm really talking about right here is variations of traits. So this is the science standards that I will be talking about. This is for 7th grade. But you can also look at the website and how this cross-curricular as well. And it talks about also right here across grade bands. And you can dive into all that kind of stuff too. So really that's what we're talking about. Oh, it's awesome. I love that people went to Kerr. I love hearing that. It tends to be a staple. I didn't go to Kerr, but I hear that all the time. So I love that. But this is where we're talking about heredity and inheritance of traits. And we're talking about how these traits get passed on. So I'm just going to dive in to some of the activities that we do and kind of how I go through this activity. And I'm going to be switching from you guys looking at me, and then I have my document camera where I'm actually going to be doing most of the activities. So this really what you're going to see is how we start our genetics unit and have the kids understand what it's all about. So the first thing that I give them, it's really just a quick activity. It's a card sort activity. So if you guys have your Zoom set up, you should be able to see me. And I want you to also be able to see my shared screen, because I'm kind of going to be going from this and also showing you guys my desk as well here in a second, because my face isn't the important thing, the activities are. So it says living things reproduce. Sort the pictures the way that you would make them for basically any reason. So I'm going to switch my cameras here. My camera view. I'm trying to get all techie, and it's been nice to not have Zoom, but remember how to go back to all those tools that I used to use with the kiddos. And so, all right, give me one sec. Cool. You should be able to see my desk now. So you should be able to see basically my PowerPoint and the desk. And so what I do is I give these kids these set of cards, and you guys are going to have access to this as well. But what I do is I give kids access to these cards, and I just say, hey, sort them however you want. And a lot of times I get, the sheep sorted with the person and the bird sorted with the fish, and I get animals and plants, and then bacteria they kind of put by themselves. And so I usually get something like this, where they sort the animals, they have the plants. This sometimes goes together, and these are separate, and I let them just kind of sort them however they want. But then I ask them the question, I say, do all of these things reproduce? And usually I get head nods of yes, they all reproduce. And then I ask them, do they all reproduce in the same way? And I kind of get blank stares like, I'm not sure. And probably what you and I would do had you not known like the difference of we're leading them to the idea of asexual and sexual reproduction, this is what I get. Humans and sheep have live birth. Fish lay eggs, bird lay eggs. Most of them know that a chameleon lays eggs. Then they kind of get the, I'm not sure about a starfish, so I'm going to put it here. Bacteria, they're not really sure. And then they usually put the plants together as well once again. So that's kind of what I get. These are kind of like the separate ones. I have the, the human and the sheep together. I have these animals together, and I get these piles. And then I tell them, you're wrong. And they love that, especially as middle schoolers, they're completely right. They tell me that they tell their parents that all the time. And then when I call them, that I hear otherwise, but that I'm like, you're wrong. And then they're like, why am I wrong? And I'm like, because there's 2 different ways to reproduce. I'm not talking about laying eggs, and we have that conversation. And so what I do is I show them that these go together. All of these plants go together along with the starfish and the bacteria. And then I also put, actually, I'm sorry. I put these all together, and then I put the plant over here. So I have the fish and the chameleon and the human and the lily, and this is what really gets them. And there's a purpose for that flower there because we're going to be dealing with that mostly today. So this is always leading to our next activity. And then they're really confused, right? Because they're like, what? We have egg layers, and okay, I have plants, and I don't really understand. I didn't really understand the bacteria before. But then I explained to them that these over here reproduce asexually. And then I talk about these ones reproduce sexually. And then they have a lot of confusion, and we have a little bit of conversation with them. And I explain the way that some of these things reproduce. And what fascinates them, and good luck finding a video on it because you can't, starfish actually divide in half. So they can divide themselves through like a median, and they will literally separate themselves and create two identical starfish. Same thing with bacteria. It doesn't matter what it is. They divide in half, divide in half, divide in half. This is a ginger plant. If you couldn't tell, you can take a piece of this off and reproduce it. Same thing with an aloe plant. This is a potato. You can take the little spores and you can plant them in the ground. Everybody has accidentally left a potato in their pantry or under their sink for too long, and it starts to grow those little eyeballs, but it's actually perfect for propagating them. So these reproduce asexually, and they talk about these ones reproduce sexually. And what they need to know mostly, and I'll show you the vocab that we go on to next, is I talk about asexual reproduction. Is the important part is it involves one parent. So you have something that's genetically identical to the parent, but it takes one parent. And that's very confusing to them as middle schoolers, but it helps them when we do these next activities, especially when we use plants. And it's a very simple, cost-effective way to do so. And then I show them this activity. So I'm going to get rid of these cards really quick. Like I said, you have access to them. If you're going to print them, I recommend laminating them, making sets for, I would say, partners, and that seems to work the best. But I have asexual reproduction, and I've done a video before about reproducing plants, but you can take this succulent and you can reproduce it. And I can take this one mother plant and actually produce it into a lot of different things like you can see in the picture. So they've done leaf cuttings. If I were to take the very top of this off, like you can see the florets, even in the bottom left corner there, those are called beheadings, and you can plant them in. So I could even take as simple as taking these guys off and just sticking them in this soil. And I tell the students, and we do this in class, and everybody gets to take a succulent home because, you know, we grow them anyway. You can grow them on our campus. We grow them on our campus. And then kids are actually reproducing. And so I tell them that you have just reproduce this plant asexually, because what it's doing is you're taking a piece of that plant. It's one parent, and you're making an identical copy from it. And they're able to see that by just planting a plant, and they get to take it home. It's great to do it around the Mother's Day time if that's where your unit falls, because then they have a Mother's Day present, especially if they grow it a little bit earlier and it starts to bloom. So if you do it earlier in the year. So it's a really cool activity, whether it's middle school, high school, or even elementary school in that 5th grade range as well. And you can even do in lower grades if you weren't connecting exactly to the standards. So you can bring plant propagation in just by using genetics, and we do it all the time. It's the easiest spot for us to add it in. So asexual reproduction, you're reproducing the plant. It's got one parent and makes an identical copy. So we show them that for that experience. And then we talk about sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction takes two parents, and they are genetically unique because you're taking the parents from mom and you're taking it from dad, and you are mixing those traits. So very easy for them to understand that mom and dad have a baby, animals, mom and dad have a baby. And we talk about a mixing of those traits, and they get what we call genetic variation because you're mixing people's traits. So another fun activity that we do is called Where Do They Get Those Traits? And I'm going to share with you the worksheet for it again. So this is the one I have. And basically what they do is they take this worksheet, and there's questions that go along with it. I can't take credit to this, but I have adapted it so you're able to use it. It came from our new textbook. But what we're able to do with this is show them genetic variation in a very simple way. And then I'm going to show you guys how you can even dive deeper. This gives them a general understanding. So we get variation by mixing traits. So what I do is I get these cups, and really simple. You can get any kind of cups, and they have 6 different of these colored little pom-poms. You could use beads. You can use just about any paper. You can cut little paper circles. but you have basically 6 cups. And I will tell you, you can't see them, but on the side of them, they're labeled for us. They say Grandpa A, Grandma A, and then Grandpa B, Grandma B. And so I have them labeled on there. And then there's 6 cotton balls in each. And then I have Dad's cup, and then I have Mom's cup. And so what they do is they can see that these cotton balls are traits. And so how do we get mixed traits from, how do we get basically our traits from not only our parents, but from our grandparents? And so I tell them, this is Dad's cup right here. I'm going to take 3 cotton balls from Grandma, because every cup is always going to have 6 traits total. And then I'm going to take 3 traits from Grandma. And it really doesn't matter who Grandma and Grandpa is, but then they're able to see that in this cup, I have 3 purple and 3 blue. And then what they do is they actually color that on the paper. So we have Grandma and Grandpa and Grandma, and then Dad or Mother, whoever it is, has half of those traits. So they color it and they're able to track it. And then we do the same thing with the other parent. And like I said, it doesn't really matter for this activity who's mom or dad. But then I have these parents, they got the traits from their parents. And so I have 3 of each. And again, they color it and they kind of move it down. So that's pretty simple for them to understand. Mom has these traits from their grandparents, but how do I get my traits? And so it's not just 3 and 3, it's not half and half, because now you're taking the traits that you got from grandparents and you're passing them to parents and then on to you. So then what I have the students do is they create 4 offspring. They're creating 4 different cows. And what they're going to do is they are going to close-eyed take 3 out of this cup and put it on the table. And then they take 3 out of this cup and they put it on the table. And this would be the offspring for the first one. So now we have a lot of genetic variation because we have 2 of the purple, I have a blue, I have a pink, and I have the yellow. And so those, what they do is they are able to look at this and track it on their sheet. They can color the yellow. I have 2 boxes that are yellow, and I tell them that every box is yellow. They have a pink, and then they have the blue, and then they have purple. And excuse my coloring because I'm just trying to go quickly for you guys. And so then they can see where genetic variation kind of comes in. We have, that I'm going to zoom and kind of clear it for you a little bit, but you're able to see, these kids really easily are able to see, oh, we get variation because it's random in what we get. And so then we move on to the brothers and sisters. I have them put the cotton balls back to where they got them, and then they do another random draw. So this time, instead of having 2 yellow from Mom, I have 2 pink and 1 yellow, and then I have this go on. So it was the same thing that I got from Dad. So you're still having differences because of what you draw each time. And that's how brothers and sisters that can come from the same parents can look so genetically different. And we really dive into that topic of conversation there. So they're really able to see that through sexual reproduction, they are able to see that there is genetic variation, and which is what we love to see. So we go from, grandma and grandpa to mom and dad and to the offspring, and they all look really different. And there are a set of questions that go along with that. So super cool. The kids really like being able to do the hands-on thing. And it really, for that aspect, it really makes sense to them. It's a new activity that we did, and it's so simple. You're just using these cotton balls. I think we got them all at Hobby Lobby. Just simple cups, and you could even do paper. You could make it really, really simple as far as that. So that was the where do you get those traits activity. And then to take a deeper dive into sexual reproduction, we do a lily dissection. And this is something that I've kind of adapted, I've changed. And we talk about the different types of flowers, and that flowers can be, unique in the way that they reproduce. And so I'm going to switch my camera here for just a moment while I chat with you guys about this. But they're really unique in the way that they reproduce, because lilies are a perfect flower, and so are alstroemeria. Because when I first started doing this activity, I was able to do it with lilies. But if any of you guys know out there that buy flowers, these are not cheap. But an easier fix to do this, and you can get a lot more bang for your buck, is alstroemeria, which is an African lily, has the same parts, and you're able to do the same thing with alstroemeria. And when you get alstroemeria, you get a bunch of them. And so you're able to do this, and a kid can have their own flower. What I usually do, just kind of a teacher hack, I usually buy a couple lilies because I have 5 periods. And so I will do the demo on the lily because it's larger and they're able to see it. And what we do is we talk about how lilies actually sexually reproduce because they have both male and female parts. Now that can be confusing to kids, but I tell them, I'm like, don't think about it in the sense of human, because plants are obviously different in the way that they reproduce. We just call it male, female biologically. And so what we do is we talk about the petals and the sepals and all this kind of stuff. And I'm not going to go into great detail about this, but I will show you guys how we are able to actually dissect these. So the stamen is the part of the male reproductive system. And so they have basically 2 parts. And then there are flowers like a carnation that are actually called stamenate, which means they only have male parts. So we explain that there are flowers that only have male parts, and then there's flowers also that only have female parts. And there are perfect flowers, which are the ones that have both. And so a carnation would be considered an imperfect flower because it only has male parts, as where a lily or alstroemeria has both male and female parts. So carnation, you can kind of see this is in here. You'll have access to this PowerPoint as well. And then these are one of my favorite, but hard to find, hibiscus flowers, so very tropical flower. They're considered what's called epistolate, which means just like the carnation is an imperfect flower and it's only male, a hibiscus is a only female flower because it only has female parts. And you're actually seeing the female part of the flower right here in the center. So I'm going to show you actually and walk you through a dissection of how you can do this. And so I do explain this to the kids. These are the type of female parts. So they can be looking like this, which is the one you're going to see today, or there can be multiple of them. So if you look at example A right here, and then you also look at this, you can probably really easily see how that's unique and different. And so this one can be a little bit different too as well. And they can be tricky to pick out, especially on an alstroemeria, which is why I always kind of show them a little bit too, some detail on what to do. This is also the ovule or the ovary at the bottom. They can look different too, depending on the flower, but I try to keep it simple. Everybody gets the same flower. And I just say, hey, plants are really, there's a lot of variety out there. They can look a lot different because you get the, what about this flower? And what about this flower? And you don't have to know everything about plants. I'm a livestock person by nature. And I will tell you that you just say, hey, these are the ones I know. And I'd be happy if you want to bring something back to me for extra credit, let me know. I'd love to know. And then you can bring it into the lesson. I think it was probably actually a student that showed me that you could use the alstroemeria for this as well, until I spent, tons of money on lilies. So let the kids help you, because you don't have to know every single type of flower and what they do. The other thing why this is important and relevant is not only flowers, is we dive into the conversation and we take a lot more time talking about agriculture, and going back to actually like the farm tour that you guys just had, and how things can self-pollinate and how things need pollinators. I'll use almonds, for example. There are different types of almonds. There's different types of walnuts. Most walnuts are self-pollinators, which means they're a perfect tree. They have the ability to pollinate themselves. Then you also have almond orchards that can do the same. They can be self-pollinators, or they have to have male and female trees. And, PCAs are the ones that have to, regulate that and figure out which ones are pollinators and all that kind of stuff, and nurseries. But I explained to the kids that you want plants that are self-pollinating because it's more efficient than having to figure out, male and female plants and things of that nature. Or we know that colony collapse is huge because of bees and bees leaving the hive. So you can dive the genetics piece into so many different agriculture directions and then still do hands-on activities. So we spend a lot of time talking about production agriculture as well, and why genetics is important in production agriculture, and why reproduction is so important, and how do we know, and how do farmers use it as well. My husband actually grows wine grapes, we grow wine grapes is what I meant to say. And wine grapes are self-pollinating as well. And so you don't need male and female plants to do that. I believe they also graft to black walnut for a lot of their grafts that they do in the nurseries when they get them. So a lot of things are cross over in all aspects, whether you're growing a tree crop or a row crop or a vine. A lot of different things can be, tied to this genetics unit, and you can really use agriculture in a really big way, or in a really simple way where you're just propagating, you know, succulents. It can go really big or it can go really narrow. Farm tours are great for kids too. And then, but I wanted to put that plug in there about how you can tie it back to agriculture and why it's so vastly important to know how things reproduce and why it's important, because farmers, whether it's for a dairy or a beef cattle operation, or if you're growing strawberries and tomatoes, you have to know reproduction in order to make the population continue for whatever crop you're looking for. So it's super important to know the science behind it, and it's really easy to tie to agriculture. So I talk about the different parts. Perfect flower, again, has both a stamen and a pistil, and then we do a flower dissection. And so really quick, I'm just going to be done with the PowerPoint here for a second, and I'm just going to focus on the activity. But we break apart the flower basically like this. And then I talk about, you know, what are tepals, meaning that it's a leaf that also has part of a sepal on it. And I'll show you an example of a good sepal, and you can see why lilies and actually Alstroemeria have tepals instead of petals and sepals. And I'll show you an example of a petal and a sepal on the carnation to show you the difference. Shout out to my high school ag teacher that told me the difference. Reproductive structures, talk about the male parts and the female parts, the leaves, obviously, why they're important. And then I have this web link that's super cool that I like to always bring people to. And I put it in there for you guys to have access because it just takes a deeper dive. This is what I would say is more for the high school upper grades, but it really dives into the Alstroemeria plant, gives them a lot of information. You could do kind of a web quest activity, but it's a great resource because it shows them really up close. And it could be even if they did the lab and they weren't sure what the pieces were, this could be like their check. So it's really cool that they have this website in order to do this. Again, didn't create this, but I've used it forever and it's a really good tool. And then I have them just begin their lab. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to switch my cameras once again, and I'm going to show you guys, and I apologize, it wants to like strobe a little bit. So I'm going to see if I can fix it. Drives my students nuts all the time. But I'm going to show you guys actually the flower dissection, which you can do. I'm going to show you a really easy way to do this, a cheap way to do this, or you can make it kind of extra sciencey depending on what your supplies are at your school. We just recently got enough dissection trays for us because we do a lot of different dissections. At our school, we do a frog dissection. We do a chicken wing dissection for the muscular system. The 8th grade science, they talk about like the ocular lens of a cow eyeball and how it refracts light. See, I teach 7th grade. I'm the life science person, but they do all that kind of stuff. So we have these trays that I'm going to show you guys, but you can do it really simple with some really easy, accessible tools as well. So I'm going to switch back down here to my lily, my Alstroemeria. I shared with you guys about the petals and the sepals. So petals are pretty much what you're used to. So on this pinkish purple carnation, you have these petals. On the back side, you have these little green guys right here. That's not the leaf. It kind of is almost like a protective barrier around the outside of the flower, and that's called a sepal. And then it goes into the stem. Now, if I show you this on a lily, it more is just the vein of the flower. So you have the petal and the sepal is actually one and the same. So when we call these together, they're called tepals. And I just wanted to show you the difference. Roses have really good sepals as well. So on a carnation, they're separate, but on lilies and Alstroemeria, they're just kind of together. So I wanted to point that out. Has nothing to do with the reproductive structures, but it's just kind of cool to know the anatomy of a plant. Same thing with the leaves. You could go into detail about photosynthesis, and that goes into a whole different set of units, but where does photosynthesis happen? It happens in the leaves, and you can take that a whole nother direction as well. That's part of the science standards too. So let's dive into the dissection. Again, I give the students the Alstroemeria because they're smaller, they still have all the parts. I'm going to show you guys the lily because it's larger and you have the ability to look at it. If you have the access to it, what we use right here, these are ordered from NASCO. This is just a dissection tool. You can give these to the kids. We go over safety. And then we have these dissection trays that have kind of a jelly pad in there, and they're able to, you know, take them out and clean them. So they're like brand new, so they are sticky in here. But they kind of have a sticky structure, and you're able to take these out completely and you can wash them. It works really great. Plus carrying supplies around the room, they work for a great kind of carrying tray. So these are obviously, if you have them, fantastic. When we didn't have those, this is what we used, a 99-cent piece, and you can already see that there's some of the basically pollen grains on here. And so we used to let me go back. I used to use the 99-cent piece of felt that you could get, and I would go buy them on sale when they were half price. And then you have plenty of them. And then I go get the leftover lumber at anywhere, Lowe's, Home Depot, and it's just like a little piece of wood. You don't even really need to have this. It's helpful only in the fact that it's a hard surface to work on. If you want to be really low tech, you can just take a hard book underneath this, and that's the way they have a hard surface to cut on. But really simple ways to do this. Couple of the tools that we need: a pair of tweezers. These are obviously from our NASCO kit, but you can use just simple tweezers from home. A pair of small fine point scissors work really well. This, I will just say, is a must. It's really helpful. You can use the kids' scissors at school, but it makes them feel a little bit more sciencey, plus you're a lot more exact. I'm going to be using a probe today just because it came in my kit to point to things for you. And then I'm also going to be using a scalpel because it's a more fine, exact way to do it. Wouldn't really recommend doing this with elementary school kids, but we train our kids how to use them, and we're pretty confident in it when they're using them. It's scary at first, but as long as you have the conversation with them and you're very kind of pointed in what you say, I'm very comfortable if you have access. Totally also not needed, but these are the tools that you would need out of there. Mostly you could do this whole thing with a pair of scissors. So I'm going to do that on a low tech setting. I know I said I was going to use the scalpel, and then I'm going to use the probe just to point to things, but I'm going to do it on a low tech just because it's easier. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have them take apart the flower, and I have them do it very pointedly. And you're like, okay, how do you just let them go for it? I very much explain all of the structures through the diagrams that I show. And then I also have a worksheet as well that I will show you really quickly. Trying to think where I put mine. It's right here. And what they're going to be doing, and you're going to have access to this worksheet as well, but I give them, these are the parts of it, and I kind of go piece by piece with them, and I do a demo, and then I have them try to figure it out on their own. And sometimes I have them use the website. Sometimes I go through it with them piece by piece and we tape it down. But what they're doing is they're taking apart a flower and they're putting it on here, and they're able to see visually what these pieces are. And then they identify what they are they male or female? So the anther is actually where the pollen grains are. So this would be a male portion, and we walk them through it. The filament is what holds it up. And yes, I know I'm doing a lot of talking, but yes, I am going to be doing this with you guys. And oh, that's a good idea. Somebody put in there that if you go to a local hospital, you can get dissection trays. That's awesome. They'll donate. And then here as well, you have, I really realized that I turned it around and I'm like backwards on you guys. You guys are so kind. You didn't even tell me. All right, give me 1 second. See if I can rotate her.
Christy, I think it's just upside down for you. It was right.
Perfect. It's backwards to me. Okay. Thank you for telling me, Mindy. I appreciate that. I'm looking at them on the screen. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm backwards the whole time. They're way too nice. So here we have the filament, and this is also the male portion. That's the male reproductive. The stamen is the whole part. So I just broke these down into two. So this is the anther, this is the filament, and this is the whole piece. So this is also the male reproductive part. You can break these down because on perfect flowers, there's multiple male parts. And on the carpel, the reason, or the pistil, it just depends on basically what source. They go by both, but there's only one reproductive structure on it. So what I do is I have them put this on here. This is the female portion. I have them write female, and then I have them identify it. So this is the stigma. The style is here. And then the ovaries down here. And I have them identify it. And then I talk to you guys about petals and sepals. So this backside would be the sepal. You can have them do 2 petals. But this is basically what they turn in. And there are some questions you can ask them as well, depending on how deep you want to go into it. So here's how I have them go about this. The first thing is I have them do is pull off every petal. And you're going to have your kids out there. They're like, I can't destroy this flower, and just say it's for the sake of science. And that's what happens sometimes. And so I have them pull off every petal, and then we talk about the sepals. And so they're able to do that. Again, on the back side, you have the petal and you have the sepal right here. If you have the lily, you can cut it and you can able to show it. But this is a really good example of how you can see the petal and the sepal are together. You're able to see the back side and the front side. And I usually bring that to their attention. And so I have them pull all the petals off. And then I also warn them, because if you get these guys, the pollen grains, which is actually like it's like the sperm basically of the plant, it's the male pollen. And so they get really messy and this can stain clothes. So I try to warn them about that. But I have them pull off the entire stamen. So this whole structure is the male reproductive part of the plant. It has the filament, it has the anther that's on top. The anther is actually what holds the pollen, which is essentially in human terms, that's like sperm or semen. And so we have this on here and you're able to remove that. So this whole portion is called the stamen. And there is actually 6 of them on every perfect flower. So you pull them off individually. I have them do it really carefully. This lily was open. If you get ones that are closed, like the one I actually taped to mine, they have, they actually don't have any of the pollen kind of developed yet. So that's kind of nice. They're a little bit cleaner. So when the lilies are closed, they don't have the pollen. This one was open. And so these are all the different stamens. So you have, again, anther, filament. This is the male reproductive system. I usually have them take one and tape it down, and then I have them break it apart. I just pulled those apart. You could have them cut them off. You can have them cut this apart. And so it's just really easy, just using a fine pair of scissors. So that's one way that we do that. The other thing, and this is what I show them, it's really cool once they get it to this point. In fact, I usually get kids some extra credit when they get to this point because they destroy the flowers sometimes. But I explained to them that if you touch the top of this, this is the sepal, this whole portion from basically where the leaves came off or the petals came off, all the way up, this is the female reproductive part. The sepal is sticky. And I asked them, why do they think it's sticky? And they said, well, so something will stick to it. Usually I get like a bug or a bee or something like that. But I tell them it's sticky because we have the pollen that will actually stick onto it. And you can actually take a paintbrush and go from here, and you're helping them to sexually reproduce. And the reason why you're doing that is because the pollen grains from the anther are getting on the sepal. And what they'll do is they will travel down through right here, which is called the stigma, and they'll go down to the style, which is the style is what holds the ovary. So it's kind of like a bumped up area right here. You can see that it's a little wider, but the pollen actually goes down this tube, and so lands on the sepal, goes down the stigma, or lands on the stigma, I'm sorry, goes down the style and ends up right down here in that ovary. Sorry, those are a lot of words at you. But then I have them cut this apart. You could break this apart if you wanted. You would have to kind of change the worksheet, and you could have them, take off the top of it. You could have them break it down. So this would be basically, again, the stigma, which is the one that's able to catch the pollen. You have the style, and then you have the ovary, and you can have them even cut the ovary open. So again, this, if you want to get more detailed, you're really, good kids, I put it on the wood block, and you can break it open, and you're able to see some different things. It just depends. And again, you can get as technical or as non-technical as you want. They can kind of play around with the tools. It just makes them feel like they're doing something out of the ordinary, and it's a really simple activity. So they can break it open, and they're able to see that there's kind of a tube-like structure on the inside there. And that's where the ovary is, at the very, very bottom. And then they get to tape it all to their piece of paper. They're able to take it home. I usually don't leave these in our notebook just because they can obviously rot and cause some grossness, but that's what we do. And so we talk about reproduction in a lot of different ways, and show them in hands-on ways how not only they can learn science, but they have the ability to do things, and learn how it's important to agriculture, not just necessarily for the the flower portion of the succulent of it, but it's something that they can do at home. And then we also relate it back to production agriculture and why it's so vastly important, whether it's an animal or a plant. that goes back into our food chain, why it can be so important. And they're able to see it on something that they see every day. They see succulents every day. They see flowers every day, depending on where they are. And just for them to know a little bit more about agriculture and then what it takes, that's what we love about doing this whole process. And it's a lot of fun, and the kids seem to like it. And all those activities lead together, and they're really simple, or they can be really detailed. It just depends on how much you want to put into it. So that's kind of what I have. I'm happy to answer questions if you guys have them. Mindy, if you guys have questions.
I learned so much. We were sitting over here taking pictures. One thing that I do want to say is I know that we've kind of said it earlier in the session quite a bit, it's come up, but the different supplies and stuff that you had, we have all kinds of grants for teachers that they can apply for, and that we can help provide some of those materials. And we also feature a grant each month in our Cream of the Crop newsletter. So I know that's been a common theme today, is apply for grants to help with funding. And we're here to help with that.
Yeah, it's been really great to be able to have like other supplies, but like I said, I'm a teacher, and I've been able to do a lot of things with very little. And so, you know, teachers innately, we have to be creative. And I know, Mindy, we've talked before about how can we make it so that everybody can do it and have access, and it's not this big expensive lab, and how can you elaborate it when you have more supplies and make it more hands-on and more, you know, more detailed, so that they feel like they're doing, like, oh, I'm doing a dissection and it's on a flower. They don't care. They don't care if it's on a worm. They love it.
Oh my gosh, so great. That was really awesome. So I don't think we have any questions for you. You did such a great job covering it. You can tell that you're a thorough teacher to 7th graders. You answered all the questions for us.
That's awesome. I don't know if anybody in the chat had any questions.
Not so far. It was great. They liked the worksheets that you use. They loved all of your information, all of your great ideas.
Awesome.
Someone said that if you go to a local hospital, they might be able to donate some plastic trays. That's how one person got.
Yeah.
So, all our bulb of flowers, so our flower bulb sexual and asexual.
So flower bulbs that would be considered, it depends on the flower again, and I am a livestock person by nature. So to be a botanist, I'm going to be lying to you. I'm not. What I will say, you're welcome, Alves. But what I will say is, as far as flowers, if you are dividing a flower, so I always go back to a succulent. If you're taking a succulent plant and you're taking a piece of it and you're making an identical copy, it's usually asexual reproduction. So in the science standards, what they need to know is asexual reproduction is a single parent genetically identical, and sexual reproduction is 2 parents genetically unique. We drive that point home to them because that's really what we need to do, or what they need to know. And that's why I put that vocab. I would venture to say that a bulb flower is considered to be asexual reproduction, much like a potato. That would be my guess. Don't quote me on that, but that would be my guess, because you're taking bulbs, and especially I'm thinking like when you get like even like onion bulbs, and they're kind of bulbing off from each other, you're really taking those different ones, or a potato when you're cutting it and making sections. That would be my best guess.
I feel like I need to go back and retake my 7th grade science class, so I'm just going to leave that there.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, you know, it was really our goal this year was to make it through all of our science standards. So I loved that was the topic you kind of came at me with, Mindy, because it was our goal to get through all the science standards. Because even in a normal year, you try really hard as a teacher, but you don't always make it, or you don't do it justice to this unit. We hit every standard. We taught it. I wouldn't say they were perfect, but we taught every standard this year to the best that we had. And so it is important. It is important to teach to the standards, not to the standards, but make sure you're hitting all those targets so the kids are, you know, informed and they are ready for the next level of science when they go on to high school, or if they're coming to middle school, whatever it may be.
Awesome. Great worksheet. Could you also put different parts on an index card and tape with packing tape? Yep. I think
absolutely. Absolutely. You could do it any way you want. I've seen people do it too. Because the lily dissection, that's not a new thing by any means. But I've seen people do it where they do it on a paper plate. And so they tape all the pieces to a paper plate, so the whole flower is on the paper plate. You could do it a lot of different ways. And I love the idea of putting it on index cards, and then you could put like the name on the back and then flip it over and maybe a definition or what it does. Our purpose, we don't really have them know plant parts other than the fact that we want them to know that the lilies have male and female parts. You can, again, so many angles you could use it, depending on what you want to know. I believe 5th grade, they go into plant and animal parts a little bit more. So that would be a great way to do that, is doing it on a flashcard. That's probably how I would do it if I taught 5th.
And Christy, I think you mentioned, can we get your slide? Can you send me your slide deck and then we can
Yes,
share that?
I will share with you the entire folder.
Okay, perfect. And then I'll make sure everyone gets it.
Awesome. That would be great.
Yep, we can do that.
Thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate that. We try. I have a great team at Kerr. Can I do a little shameless plug here for a second, Mindy?
Sure.
Awesome. So at Kerr, we are one of the only programs in the state of California that has a middle school science class that counts for an agriculture science class that counts for their science grade. So our students in 7th and 8th grade take ag science instead of regular science, and it counts for their science credit versus being an elective class. So our class is not an elective. Yes, they elect to take it, but they are getting credit for science. We have a lot of retention. In fact, we have to usually cut kids every single year because there's just not enough bodies to teach it. I am full-time 7th grade. I have 5 sections. If they'd let me, I would do a 6th, but they want to spread the love to the regular science classes because we want to keep, they always want to keep it even. And then the 8th grade teacher also has a full load of 8th graders too. She has 5 sections as well. So kids want to be in our classes because of the hands-on. We also have a great science department here. We work really well together. But Kerr, this was at Kerr before I was here. And if anything I could advocate to you teachers at the middle school level, is try to get that passed, because kids will learn for you. They will work for you because especially if you're near a feeder high school, we're right down the street from Elk Grove High School, and they see their siblings showing animals. It's great. We have a lot of retention with our kids, and we get kids in agriculture for 6 years versus 4 years, and we try to do fun things that we're not overlapping with the high school so they're not burnt out. We don't want that burnout, because we've all been through, most of us maybe have been through high school, and you're like getting to your senior year and like, oh, I feel like I've done too much. And we're able to get the kids that are necessary to be in agriculture and want to be there and be effective, and they're starting out really strong as freshmen. So it's a great feeder program for our high school.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending your Saturday afternoon with us. We appreciate it. And I know the teachers loved your presentation. You're getting so many good comments. So
I see. Thank you guys. You guys are too kind. Too kind.
Thank you so much, Christy. And I know it's Saturday afternoon, but don't sign off just yet. We have a well, you can sign off, but not the teachers. We have a few announcements and a few door prizes, and I promise you the door prizes are good. So you're going to want to hang around for just a few more minutes. We hope you enjoyed our time together this morning and early afternoon, learning about agriculture and how we can all meet the needs of our students as they gain knowledge in a number of different ways. Whether you are in the classroom or you're a county helper or you're a part of the UC Cooperative Extension, agriculture can help can provide lifelong lessons for your students that truly empower them and leave them wanting more for the rest of their lives. So remember that we at Ag in the Classroom are here to make your journey easier and interesting. We showed a few of our resources today, but there's hundreds more at learnaboutag.org. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. You can email us at info@learnaboutag.org or mindy@learnaboutag.org. And we are always here to help you. Also, I know that Denise Stewardson shared a little bit about our social media and our Cream of the Crop e-newsletter, but we do post activities and grants and all kinds of fun things on our social media channels. So I would encourage you to follow us at learnaboutag.org. And in our Cream of the Crop e-newsletter, we send out one monthly e-newsletter. We highlight different teachers throughout the state, the amazing projects that they're doing. We feature grants, we feature upcoming activities, resource updates. So if you're not subscribed, I would encourage all of you to subscribe to Cream of the Crop. And finally, if you enjoyed today, I would encourage you to look into attending our the annual California Ag in the Classroom Conference. It's September 22nd through 24th in Ventura. And we've tried for 3 years to go to Ventura. So this time this time we're going and we're going to be in person, and we're looking into having a hybrid option, but we're so excited to explore Ventura County agriculture. And so if you guys enjoyed this, we encourage you to check out that conference. And so we want to thank all of our speakers and everyone who helped us put this conference together. And I will make sure that we get links to both Denise's presentation and Christy's presentation. And we'll also be sending an evaluation. So I really, really appreciate all of the chat today. The chatter in the chat was great. We made this engaging, and I really appreciate that. But I also hope that you'll share all of your feedback with us when we get the evaluation. And then I just want to send another special thanks to the California Department of Food and Agriculture for helping sponsor this so that we could provide this for free to all of our teachers through their Cal Ag Plate grant. So thank you so much for spending part of your Saturday with us. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon. And please reach out if you have any questions. We're here to help. Thank you.